This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes, for being here on behalf of the Office of the Auditor General this morning. This issue has obviously captured a lot of media interest and public interest in recent days, and I understand that your office has been engaged on it for some time. Can you tell us on what date your office first communicated with the whistleblowers?
So I believe that our first encounter with the whistleblowers was in November 2022. There was a number of meetings between November and January with the whistleblowers. A presentation was made to our office. Information had been shared in November, December, January. Would you like me to continue with what happened after that?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd like to find out what your advice to them was, and then maybe if we need to look back at any of that previous timeline, we can.
When we receive information from any party, that information is taken into consideration as we determine what our audit priorities are going to be. In this case, with the information that we received, given the nature of the organization of SDTC, and particularly with Governor and Council appointees, we reached out to the Privy Council office, senior officials there at the end of January, early February. The Privy Council office turned the matter over to ISED. And I guess I should say that when we engaged with the Privy Council office, it was to make the connection between the whistleblowers and the Privy Council office. The Privy Council office turned the material over to ISED, and then ISED had carriage of the file after that.
So why wasn't an audit initiated when this was first brought to your attention? It's since been evidenced that there has gross mismanagement has occurred at Sustainable Development Technologies Canada. So why didn't you initiate an audit at first?
So the allegations that we have received, we have to recognize that SDTC, the foundation, is more arm's length than the normal department that we audit. We do have a mandate to follow funding agreements, and that's what SDTC has with the federal government. In our view, at the time, it was preferable to see what management's response was going to be to the allegations, and then for us to keep our eye on it and determine when or if an audit would be appropriate.
Okay, have you seen the fact-finding report that was precipitated by this referral to PCO and later ISED, the report by RCGT?
Yes, we received a copy on October 3rd. I've reviewed the redacted version. I know that our team has an unredacted version.
Okay. So you have not seen the unredacted version?
No, and that's more because I haven't asked for it from our team. I've reviewed the redacted version.
So that report evidences that the chair and the CEO are both in conflicts of interest, that tens of millions of dollars have been given to ineligible companies, and we still have Sustainable Development Technologies Canada saying that they're good stewards of taxpayer dollars. How can both of those things be true at the same time?
So the reason, one of the main reasons why we are going into audit is because the report is equivocal. The report from RCGT is equivocal. It leaves room for interpretation, and I'll point to particular statements. There are, on the conflict of interest side, it says the conflict of interest policy appears to not have been consistently followed. SDTC did not appear to follow the recovery requirement. A recipient of COVID-19 relief payments appeared to be ineligible. There's a bunch of statements like this, and we want to get our audit work done to identify what is in fact happening there. We don't have a view yet. We will do our audit work and determine a view, but this report from RCGT left a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, I think that's well said, if not a bit understated. I want to offer you some quotes that we've heard from a senior official with ISED, the CFO, Mr. McConaughey. Quote, preliminary findings of the fact-find exercise, there is smoke around the majority of allegations. That was in May. In July, he said, quote, it was free money. It's almost a sponsorship scandal level kind of giveaway. In August, he said a lot of sloppiness and laziness, outright incompetence. The minister's going to flip out when he hears this stuff. Then in September, quote, the report implicates the board in terrible ways by not following the process, by not following the COI, conflict of interest regime, by not being prudent fiduciaries, end quote. Are you familiar with, have you heard these recordings, and were they furnished to you by the whistleblowers?
So I don't know whether the whistleblowers have given it to our audit team. Our audit team hasn't told me that they've received that. Over the last week, the department had informed me, in fact, that there would likely be a report about recordings of their staff. I haven't heard those recordings at this point in time. That actually didn't factor into our decision to launch the audit.
Prior to your launching the audit, I did write a letter to your office requesting an audit, having heard some of the very troubling allegations. There's bulk approvals, bulk payments to companies that didn't ask for it and didn't need it. In some cases, in conflicts of interest from board executive members who were involved. And the external reviewers said that the funds should not be paid. But millions of payments were paid out right at year end, and were just enough to meet targets so the CEO and her friends could get bonus. Isn't that highly suspicious?
So as I said, the decision to launch this audit was made on the basis of our review of the RCGT report. We did receive your letter on October 30th. We informed ISED and the department and SDTC on the 26th that we were launching an audit.
Mr. Hayes.
You'll be receiving a response back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, in answer to a previous question, you noted that the Auditor General had conducted an audit of SDTC, a report that was issued in 2017 and covered the period between 2006 and 2017. I would note that in that report, the Auditor General found that at the time, SDTC had a quote, rigorous and objective processes in place to assess, approve, and monitor projects, end of quote, and, quote, had measures in place to mitigate potential conflicts of interest, end of quote, and had, quote, extensive due diligence process, quote, end of quote, that was followed. Do you have any reason to doubt that the Auditor General was given inaccurate or incomplete information to draw those conclusions?
No, I don't. So if I could just make two comments about that. If we ever have concerns about access to information or the sufficiency of information, it's our duty to bring it to Parliament. And I know that in this case, at the time I was the head of our legal services, there wasn't an issue around that. If I might just add one thing, I'll put it this way. Positive conclusions in our audit report are even more concerning to me, frankly, because when we find positive things, we want to make sure that there's no negatives that might be hiding. So when we report a positive to Parliament, it's because it's positive.
Okay, thank you for that. And since that audit, Liberal Industry Minister Navdeep Bains, as he was then, appointed a personal friend of Justin Trudeau as chair of SDTC. Since the appointment of that individual, a cloud of gross mismanagement, fraud, and corruption has descended upon SDTC, and I would submit that that is supported by the RCGT independent report. You said, sir, in answer to a question posed by Mr. Barrett, that findings in that report are equivocal. However, I would respectfully challenge you on that submission in that, for example, at 2.3.1 of the RCGT report, it is stated, quote, when brought to the Board of Directors for approval, the COVID-19 relief payments to active companies were found not to have followed the corporation's conflict of interest procedures and that board members did not recuse themselves. That involved some $38 million of taxpayers' money that went out the door in which board members were in a conflict of interest, did not recuse themselves, approved the money. That isn't that is not an equivocal finding. That is an unequivocal finding that there were breaches of the conflict of interest procedures.
So I would say that we will do our audit work to determine, in our opinion, what is and is not present there. I make the statement about the findings are equivocal. In the very same section, but in the summary of key observations, the way that is presented is conflict of interest policy may not have been followed for COVID relief payment initiatives. I understand entirely what you're saying. I think that when I use the word equivocal, I mean that it leaves it open to different interpretations, and that's exactly what's here.
For certainly language in the report that is very unequivocal. And would you agree that at the very least the RCGT report raises serious questions about mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and potential wrongdoing at SDTC? Would you agree with that?
The reading the RCGT report, the statements in there and the unanswered questions was one of the main factors for us to decide to launch our audit.
Thank you for that. Through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Hayes, you stated that discussions have started with the team at SDTC. Who is your office in contact with at SDTC? Who is that team?
So I think when I mentioned the team, I mean our audit team has started discussions with SDTC. I would expect that it's their management at this point, but I don't have specifics on who exactly that is.
Well, can you confirm, because I note that in the 2017 audit,
very briefly,
the staff was interviewed, but can you commit that the audit team will interview executives and the chair at SDTC, ISET officials, including the...
I'm going to cut you off there, but I will allow Mr. Hayes just a brief answer on that, please.
I can assure this committee in Parliament that we will always do rigorous work. We will talk to everybody that we need to talk to.
At the heart of this Liberal scandal is the payment under Minister Philip Champagne's department is the payment of at least $40 million to companies that did not meet the funding criteria. And I say at least $40 million because some of the media reports seem to indicate that that's probably the bare minimum. We're talking about other tens of millions of dollars that went to new funding streams, new companies being created under funding agreements that did not accord with the original funding agreement with the federal government. So in my view, that raises criminality. And I know that the original report from RCGT put restrictions that this is in no way an admission of any liability, civil or criminal. I know that no police agency has taken this on their own. So I'm going to turn to you, sir, because I know that part of your department, there is a mandate to turn matters over to the police where you discover criminality. So I'd like to ask you specifically as to what that threshold is. What is that legal threshold or administrative threshold where you believe that the police need to investigate? And to give you an example, when police investigate any crime, from shoplifting to homicide, their governing doctrine is, do we have evidence of probable and reasonable grounds to charge someone or to arrest someone, which is distinct from the prosecutor's threshold, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt before anyone can be convicted. So what is the threshold, legal or administrative, within your department?
So typically in these kinds of situations where we're auditing a program and there are matters that come to our attention that raise questions about wrongdoing, we will follow the trail as far as we can. We'll gather as much information as we can. We will make a determination at some point in time, once we hit a sufficient amount of evidence of wrongdoing, to turn it over to law enforcement. Now, historically, there have been a number of cases where that's happened. The sponsorship scandal might have been one of them. I'm not entirely sure, but there were definitely examples where, for example, with the correctional investigator, his conduct himself, we turned matters over to the RCMP. There were other files where there was potential fraud that we turned over. We are not in the business of determining mens rea. the guilty mind is not our area of expertise. We gather facts, and when we feel that there is a risk that there might be criminality, and it's not the level of reasonable doubt, it's not the level of sufficient grounds to proceed with an investigation, we turn it over to the RCMP. We allow them to determine whether they're going to seek a production order or a warrant, and they do their thing.
So what that tells me, sir, is that your department, the Auditor General's mandate, is an extremely low threshold standard. It's not a mens rea standard. It's not a police standard. It's not a prosecution standard. If you uncover in your belief some evidence, whether that's a little bit of evidence or a multitude of evidence that could constitute criminality, you're going to refer this to the police.
I think I would qualify that by saying that the Auditor General Act gives the Auditor General the ability or the authority to inform senior public officials about matters discovered in our audit.
Stop you right there, sir, just because of a shortness of time. I've identified, just on reviewing the material that I've reviewing the material from RCGT, I've identified 2 potential criminal charges that this government could be facing, as well as the company in question, SDTC. That is government fraud pursuant to Section 121 of the Criminal Code, and fraud pursuant to Section 380 of the Criminal Code. 380 of the Criminal Code says everyone who by deceit, falsehood, or other fraudulent means, whether or not it is a false pretense within the meaning of the Act, defrauds the public of any person, whether ascertained or not, of any property, money, or valuable security, is guilty of an indictable offense.
And that is your time, I'm afraid, Mr.
Thank you.
Brock. Yes. Attorney Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes as well, please.
Chair, so after RCGT released their report, SDTC responded. But I want to be clear that in this $1 billion Liberal slush fund, $40 million was reviewed by RCGT, but it didn't provide the fund with a clean bill of health. And though the statement that was issued by SDTC said, quote, no clear evidence of wrongdoing or misconduct, it found, quote, no clear evidence of wrongdoing or misconduct, end quote, that seems entirely inconsistent with the reality of the situation. Having my review of the situation following discussions with the whistleblower and reviewing media reports, I wrote to your office requesting an audit. Your office had reviewed the report and has spoken with some of the players and has also launched and has now launched an audit. Is it credible to have the people who presided over the era in question to be charged by the Department of Innovation with implementing the Minister's recommendations to rectify the issues that have been raised?
If I might just address the SDTC statement, I'll note that they also said that no further investigation is merited. From our perspective, there is merit to doing a deeper dive into this. And the other point that we wanted to look into is the statement that they made that regular business operations will continue, including the dispersal of funds for all existing projects in our portfolio in accordance with companies' contribution agreements. We feel that there was a need to dig deeper. Now, your specific question was about the competence of management to be able to rectify this. I don't have an opinion at this stage. This will be something that we will go in and audit. But if there are problems, we will highlight them. And I know that the government is aware as well of the nature of the allegations and the work that we're going to do.
Well, thank you. I'm going to share some of my time with Mr. Brock in just a moment, but in light of the amount of funds that are available and the impropriety, the misconduct allegations that have been raised, the potential of fraud outlined by my colleague, Mr. Brock, is this the type of situation where funds should be suspended and their dispersal should not be continued?
So that is a decision that is for the government and the foundation to make. I do note that they have, I believe they've suspended the approval of new projects. At this point, we we would need to do our work and make a recommendation.
Thank you very much. I have about 2 minutes and 10 seconds left. I'd like to turn the time to Mr. Brock, Mr. Chair.
I finished off by reading out to you Section 380 sub 1 of the Criminal Code, which speaks to fraud. The allegations, in my respectful view, sir, as a former Crown attorney, raise this to a possible fraud investigation, particularly when you're talking about grants, free money, free taxpayer money to startups with ties to own senior management raises a very, very high threshold, in my view, of criminality. My concern is this: given the RCMP's handling already of Justin Trudeau's Aga Khan affair, the illegal vacation, most recently the SNC Lavalin affair, where he refused
order,
to cooperate with the
Just
RCMP.
1 second.
Given how some Canadians, if not millions of Canadians, feel that the RCMP mishandled both criminal investigations involving our sitting Prime Minister, is there any prohibition from your department of referring criminality with respect to the handling of this particular scandal to the Ontario Provincial Police, in addition to the RCMP, who also have jurisdiction over the entire province of Ontario? Is there any impediment to do so, sir?
I would say that the normal course for us is to deal with the RCMP in matters such as this. I don't know whether or not we have referred a matter to another law enforcement agency before. For example, if we ever came across an individual situation where we might engage with Ottawa Police or OPP, I don't know if we've done that before. I don't believe that there's a prohibition, and certainly there wouldn't be a prohibition from us responding to a production order or a warrant from...
My last question, sir. Are you prepared
Briefly.
to table the unredacted report from RCGT to this committee?
I think that would be a matter for the department. I haven't reviewed the redacted or the unredacted report, but I think that would be a question for the department.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So we've heard from the government that they're going to participate or cooperate with the Auditor General's office, with your office on this. Aren't they required to participate? Their willingness is not an open question.
No, we have a statutory power that allows us access to information and officials in a timely way.
Okay. And did you meet with the Department of Innovation? You've met with them up to this point?
Yes.
And how many times?
I don't know if I can give you an exact number. It's regular. Since September, it's been more frequent. I'm going to say it's more than 5 times since September that I have met with senior officials.
Did you meet with them last week?
Yes.
And were you happy with the outcome and the productivity of that meeting?
Well, we informed them that we were conducting an audit on the basis of the information that we had to date and asked for information which we received. So I am satisfied with everything to date.
Okay. Were they pleased to receive the news that they were going to be audited, that SDTC was going to be audited?
I think that I would say that they accepted, as most organizations do, that we are coming in. And I do think that in the discussions that we've been having with them, the fact that there are open questions is something that needs to be sorted out.
Sure. Do you know anything about the scope of the RCGT report?
So we do have information from the department about the scope and the approach that RCGT took. I have those documents. I haven't read them yet, but I have them.
Do you know if they interviewed the whistleblowers?
I don't know.
Do you know if they interviewed all of the executive members?
Again, I don't know. I have that information. I don't know, though. Yeah.
Were there any? Do you know if there were changes requested by ISED to RCGT with respect to the final report?
I believe that there were. However, that in and of itself is not necessarily a red flag. It's something to look at. But I'll use our reports as an example. As we prepare reports and we share them with the entities being audited, at times there are things that require adjustment because they don't come across factually accurately, even though that's our intention. So we will look at the past reports. We have access to them. I believe we even have them. But that in and of itself is not dispositive of a problem.
And you're not aware offhand then what the requested changes were?
I don't know. Yeah,
okay.
Offhand.
Well, that's something for for the ministry staff who are tuned in today to note in anticipation of the minister's appearance at a different committee on Monday. Do you know the date that PCO, on which date PCO raised the issue that was referred to PCO by you? What date they raised that with ISED?
That would be a question for the department. Like I said earlier, I know that PCO moved very quickly. My recollection is not exact in terms of what happened in January and February, but I'm almost positive that happened in February.
Okay. And who is in charge of governance? Like who's in charge of governance at Sustainable Development Technology Canada?
I would have to say that accountability rests with the CEO, with the president.
Okay. So the CEO will be who you're primarily working with, your office is primarily working with?
We'll work with all management, and including the CEO, yeah.
And if the CEO and the board chair or other members of the executive or other members of the management are implicated by your findings or by the findings of the Raymond Chabot Grant Thornton report that was commissioned by ISED, is that something that's concerning? Like, how do we accept the findings if the people who are being investigated are supposed to be the ones who are, unlocking filing cabinets and releasing documents that you request? So,
as far as audit standards go, we have to have confidence in the integrity of management, and we will do our testing for that. We will also make sure that we have access to everything. If we have any concerns about access, we'll raise them. But our work will be rigorous and extensive. So if there are any concerns, if there are controls, processes, etc., that need to be tightened because there were problems, we will raise them. And we typically make recommendations, and organizations have action plans that put them on the spot, frankly. So I think at this point in time, the next step is to get the objective, impartial information that we're going to bring forward. And I know that the department has already been working with the organization on an action plan. We're going to be looking at the implementation of that action plan at the end of the day. If there are other things that need to be done to make sure that this organization operates well, then
thank you.
We'll be able to have that conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Just a brief question. Confidentiality. I know accusations have been made about this. I have experienced situations in committee where the names of individuals, the names of private citizens were circulated and they were condemned. Question, please. I'd like to have reassurances that this will remain confidential. We will be careful with the names of individuals and corporations that are involved in our audit. In our report, when necessary, we need to sometimes identify people when decisions have been made, and this is a decision that we don't take very seriously, considering all kinds of factors. Thank you.